Hello, good evening, everybody. So, thank you for joining us tonight for, well, for fighting transphobia in schools. Um, Yesterday was actually Idaho Bit International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. Originally, this day was established to commemorate the decision in 1990 to remove homosexuality from the International Classification of Diseases. Uh, but now we celebrate this day to raise awareness of violence, discrimination, and repression of our communities. Today we're talking about transphobia in schools. And I think this is an important topic because we did see in 2022, after the ECQ was lifted, an increase in the number of students complaining about anti-trans school policies. These include um, anti, like haircut policies, that aren't trans friendly, uniform policies that discriminate against trans people, and other sorts of complaints from trans students. And tonight we'll be joined by Attorney Eljay M. Bernardo. He's the Legal Advocacy Officer and Paralegal Program Coordinator of Rainbow Rights Philippines since 2015. He handles the capacity building, network, and research and documentation of Rainbow Rights trained paralegals and has conducted various trainings for different public agencies and private organizations, including the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. He obtained his Pol Sci and Juris Doctor degrees from the University of the Philippines, where he was a founding member and former vice president of the UP Outlaws. He is currently employed in the Commission on Elections as the administrative chief of the Office of the Chairman. And also, we have with us Dean Matt Alea. He's a trans rights advocate and the founder of and executive director of Transmasculine Philippines. It's a community-based organization that provides a platform for trans men and masculine presenting non-binary people in the Philippines to be heard and feel supported. He is a writer and a speaker and has held workshops on workplace gender sensitivity with several corporate partners. His biggest advocacies are safe medical transitioning, employment equity for LGBTQIA plus Filipinos, and legal gender recognition. And I'm Chase. I'm from Transman Equality and Awareness Movement. We do have similar advocacies as Matt from TMPH. We also tackle, you know, education in the corporate setting, in educational institutions, no? um, and also with medical professionals, because we also advocate for safe medical transitioning. We also advocate for legal gender recognition, and we also advocate for equity in employment and education. So all of us tonight, although LJ isn't here yet, but hopefully he'll join us soon. Um, each of us has experience handling discrimination cases in schools, or at least anti-trans policies. No? So maybe let's start with Matt. Matt, what would you say is the most common or the top concern of trans students in a school setting?
Well, from my experience, I think that the top two most common are definitely cases involving uniform. So for like schools and universities that require their students to wear the uniform, we've gotten some requests in the past from students asking for help in being able to wear the uniform that is aligned with their gender identity at school, and also being able to use their live name at school. So sometimes using their live name like in class or in like on the class list, or for ceremonies like graduation, pinning ceremonies for certain courses, and things like that. So aside from those two, the next probably most common is like direct discrimination. So like students who are victims of transphobia or homophobia from their teachers or their fellow students or like administrators in their school.
All right. How about LJ? What are the top or common concerns that you get at Rainbow Rights from trans students?
Hello, good evening to both of you and our viewers. For Rainbow Rights, it's basically the same, but also I would like to add in sometimes even parents. Um, those parents of diverse soji, their kids get bullied a lot. So you also have those. I'm just looking at the past year. Also, uniform, of course, grooming, um, sexual harassment cases. Could also be, of course, because of the Safe Spaces Act that protects students and people, basically all of us, from transphobic and homophobic comments. So there's also that. And also, what else? Peer-to-peer bullying, also teacher-to-student bullying, which also amounts to harassment. Basically, those using their live names, as Matt already already relayed to us. Yeah, that's it.
We've seen similar trends also, and what I noticed was that there was a large increase in these types of complaints in 2022. I think I don't know if you agree, but I think it was because of the ECQ. During the ECQ, trans students, especially trans women, were able to grow out their hair. And then
Yeah,
when face to face classes resumed, suddenly schools were requiring them to cut their hair. And so, like, especially students, who entered college their first year during ECQ and they didn't have to deal with the uniform or any other uh, you know, policies about their appearance. And suddenly, with the resumption of face-to-face classes, they were faced with this sudden problem na, what am I gonna do, no, when I get back to face-to-face classes in school? So, all right. What do you think is the difference between handling discrimination cases in basic education and higher education? So, usually when, well, the student is a minor and when the student is no longer a minor. Maybe from LJ.
legally. I'm sorry, I always come from a legal background. So it's easier for basic education because you all could always use the um, institutions cannot hide from academic freedom. So academic freedom is only given for institutions of higher learning. So that's our universities and colleges and college level. Now senior high school level also, because on the senior high school level, they go to universities. A lot of universities also offer senior high school. So it's arguable that senior high school is part or already part of the institutions of higher learning. And also for kids, at the level of basic education, we could we could also rely on a very important law, which is the child abuse law. There's there's a provision under the child abuse law wherein anything that curtails the development, psychological development of the child, and you can prove it, that's a violation of the child. That's a violation of the law. So that's a bigger in that's a bigger penalty. Also, I would also credit a lot of advocates in trans rights to really drive the point that children should be protected from abuse and any kind of abuse, and they should be allowed to learn. The education is a right. Basic education is a right. At the higher level, a lot of those support is not present. because they're older, and there's also this idea that they already have autonomy of their bodies, and then basically there's just a lack of um, information on what soji is and what freedom of expression is. So that freedom, usually tinitingnan natin siya na, ay okay na yan kasi mas matanda na sila. Hindi na yan problem yan because I didn't experience that when I was a kid. Pero when people are still at before 18 years old, a lot of people would want to throw a lot of support to them. So that's why there's to children and higher when they become adults already, basically 18, 16 patas. But also the on the flip side of that, for children, yun naman yung stronger yung ano ng parents. Sometimes the parents mismo, they're uneducated, but you will always have to ask for consent from the parents. And what if the parent is is not open to or not knowledgeable about SOGIAS? So that's the problem there. When you get clients or when you have complainants who are older, they understand more about their rights. So yun yung mga differences niya. Um,
Uh, how about with you, Matt? I know that you handle a lot of cases with college and university students. Do you also handle younger students?
Yeah, I think for me, from my experience, the main difference is that usually when it comes to the younger students, especially the ones who are like in high school, we find that maybe it's like a result of like a change in the generation, but we find that for the younger students, since their parents are also younger, their parents tend to be more open compared to like the parents of those who are already of college age, like adult age. And so when we are assisting those students, we're able to be like to more easily, I guess, persuade schools to also be supportive of the student because the parents themselves are supportive of their child. So the school tends to listen to the parents of their students. So when a parent like says that my child is transgender and wants to use their lip name or the uniform, wants to wear this certain uniform, the school becomes more open to it. Well, and then in comparison naman to universities, I think that it's not so much about what do you call this, like the level of education. I think that when it comes to universities, it's really um, strongly affected by whether or not it's a sectarian school. So like universities that are state universities, they tend to be more progressive, more open, although there are some Catholic universities that are progressive. It's just that most cases when it's a Catholic backed university, um, they tend to be more uh, not open towards acceptance of their transgender students. So yeah.
Uh, I, I like that you brought up that when parents are supportive, schools tend to, uh, give way or give in to the requests of the students. Um, and I've heard several stories of this even from years back. As long as parents are supportive, schools tend to be more receptive. No, um, LJ mentioned academic freedom. So schools, especially higher learning institutions, right? They like to hide behind academic freedom and say that they have the right to implement anti-trans school policies. So I just wanted to share this because I read up on the way the Constitution phrased academic freedom. So in 1935, it used to say universities established by the state shall enjoy academic freedom. So at that time, it was only state universities that enjoyed academic freedom. In 1973, they edited it and, well, they revised it and said that all institutions of higher learning shall enjoy academic freedom. So it seems that academic freedom is something for the institution to enjoy. But in 1987, it's been rephrased again, and then it says academic freedom shall be enjoyed in all institutions of higher learning. So it seems to imply that it's not only for the institution, but for everyone in it, maybe. I don't know. Maybe LJ can uh, give more insight into that.
Oh, that's really interesting. I never, look back at the other iterations of academic freedom in our constitution. However, it's already limited by the Supreme Court in various cases, usually in cases where students are punished because of some level of morality. Kunyari, in the cases of a lot of Catholic schools wherein their students post photos bikini class. There are a lot of cases like that. Much more than you can imagine. I thought there was one or two, but a lot of cases like that. And the Supreme Court already, I think, decided and interpreted how academic freedom is exercised. Basically, institutions of higher learning can impose or can impose their standards for learning, even dictate sometimes morality, as long as it is in their handbooks. It's not changing. Everyone has due process. They know it. They accepted it before they entered school. Yes, but however, that interpretation is of course um, subject to change, of course. And I think no one has argued before that the wording of the of the Constitution has changed. And I get that point, Chase. Very good catch. In academic freedom in higher learning. So it might be something that does not impede a student from learning anything. No? So, however, the court has interpreted the academic freedom as something more of a prerogative of the schools to impose punishment, to define their standards of how to learn things and how to become a professional for some reason, how to achieve how to achieve the standards so that they can graduate from a school. That's usually the interpretation.
Uh, well, hopefully
Ganun
in
siya.
the future,
Hopefully it can
we'll
change.
see a case where a student,
Magandang
you
tanong.
know,
Parang wala pa akong nakita, Chase, na who argued that, it has changed. And in 1935, only state universities have academic freedom. So that's the thing. It didn't exist before 1973. So that's good.
uh, because diba, I think now students can argue that what about my academic freedom?
Yeah, I really
And I
like that.
guess the court would have to, if they recognize it, they'd have to balance the freedom of the school and the student.
Yeah, that's usually our argument. Our argument is, of course, you have your academic freedom, but it cannot impede on my right to self-determination, my right to life, basically. That's a very
Uh,
important aspect of my living. If I cannot express myself, can still call it a life. And if you expose me to bullying, to abuse, because you won't allow me to express myself, is that life worth living? So that's the argument of the advocacy, of course. I,
uh,
I think we can't abandon it. It's in
uh,
conjunction with how we can see the development also. That's really nice. Thank you for the chase.
yeah. Thanks for that, LJ, for the insight. And I also wanted to share a recent argument that we've used in schools regarding um, our basis is the Mental Health Act. So the Mental Health Act defines discrimination as it's very long, but it includes denial of reasonable accommodation. And so our argument is that because trans people suffer from gender dysphoria and because it's a condition that's recognized, And the treatment for gender dysphoria is gender affirming care, no, which includes social interventions designed to support the trans individual. Schools cannot impose anti-trans policies on transgender students with gender dysphoria. Do you think this is a, like, plausible argument that um, we can present to schools? Or your thoughts, Matt? How do you feel about using the gender dysphoria card?
Um, I do think that it's valid as an argument because although not all transgender people experience gender dysphoria, a large
Mm-mm,
part of our population do, and those are the people who need accommodations and able to be able to not further trigger or intensify their gender dysphoria, because I think most people who don't understand the trans community also don't understand how debilitating gender dysphoria can be. Like they underestimate how psychologically damaging it can be. Like for many of the members of our community, when they're going through their gender dysphoria, it can get to a point where they don't even want to go outside, they don't want to do anything, they are forced to stay at home because it's too difficult to be able to interact with other people because of the anxiety and fear that gender dysphoria has. So I think that bringing it up as an argument is important because yeah, it's real and it happens, and many members of our community experience it, and the schools and institutions have to acknowledge that it's part of their responsibility to make sure that they don't contribute to that type of discrimination on their students.
mm-mm. Thanks, Matt. Um, yeah. How about LJ? What do you think about the Mental Health Act and its application in situations like this?
I would always argue anything that works for our community is always welcome. So if you argue on that terms also, and if they listen, then it would always be better. But maybe also I could just I'll just suggest expanding also, not just citing gender dysphoria, but also other mental health conditions developed by people who are who receive abuse, who get ridiculed, di ba those things
Mm,
also. So that's a very strong argument. And you know what I really like about this argument is that argumenting about arguing and citing the Mental Health Act, because the advocacy for mental health and advocacy for LGBTQIA are very close actually. When the Mental Health
mm,
Act passed, we were so happy for the advocates, and they're also rooting for us. So now that that it's helping the community also, it's really a win for basically the human rights sector, the people who advance human rights. So that's why I also really like using the Mental Health Act for this, because somehow it came from a very um, similar place. That's why it fits to our experience, because the Mental Health Act is not really crafted top down, meaning the senators thought of it and the legislators thought of it. There's a lot of push from the ground, and that push from the ground also coincided with the advocacies of LGBTQ plus orgs. And I think a
mm.
lot of us were consulted for the Mental Health Act also. So that's why I really like using it. And it's such a tawag dito, parang it's just a lost opportunity, because it's been enacted since when? 2016?
2018. Uh-uh.
2018. So parang sayang, may 2 years na hindi pa natin ginagamit. So yun. But that's very valid. A lot of people suffer from mental health conditions because of the discrimination that they experience. And removing that
Oo.
discrimination would eventually that's the reasonable accommodation for them also.
Uh, I mean, yeah, definitely we should use every law we can
Yeah,
because, the social equality bill, it's been how many years now? 23?
20, I think it's
Some,
20, yeah.
oo, tapos wala pa rin. So,
Yeah.
definitely we should utilize what laws we have right now and try to find ways to apply it to our situations. No?
Correct.
So, moving on, um, how does transphobia affect the lives of trans students? Like, because I think many schools, many people feel that, it's just a uniform, it's just hair, like deal with it, and you can do what you want after you graduate. But I think there is a lot of, you know, like effects on the trans community because of anti-trans sentiments, attitudes, policies, etc. Matt?
Um, well, since we've already been touching on mental health, I think first and
Mm-mm.
foremost that's the number one effect, that these anti-trans policies in schools directly affect the mental health of their students, because ayun, like trans students will always have this fear and anxiety and stress. Instead of being able to focus on being a student and their studies, they are forced to deal with these policies that attack their identity and their expression and their freedom. And it also really limits their opportunities, because not not a lot of universities and schools are progressive or accepting here in the Philippines. So there are so many students, especially those who are outside, like the metro, outside of Manila. They, like the universities and schools in their areas, definitely don't usually have supportive policies, and it's not like they can just uproot their life and move somewhere else for the sake of being able to go to a school that accepts them. And it's not fair. It's it's not fair for these students to not have the equal opportunity that their non-transgender peers have. And it also really, you know it just affects their quality of life. Like we talked about earlier, there's the issue of mental health. And it it needs to be said that it can be to a point of like life and death for these students. Like there are students who can be driven to the point where they start developing suicidal ideation, which is unfortunate, because at that point in your life, your only worries should be your studies and taking care of yourself. But instead, you have to feel like you're fighting against the academic institution. And I feel like it's really understated how difficult that can be. Like when people say, like what you mentioned, na you should just wait until after you can do whatever you want when you graduate. You have to acknowledge that there will be some students who won't even make it that far, because they can't deal with the fact that the school is discriminatory against them. It's either they end up becoming depressed and eventually will be forced to drop out, or they get kicked out because they have anxiety with coming to school, or worse, they're driven to the point where they take their own lives. And that's sad and very, depressing to think about with our community, but that's also the reality. So ayun, I think it's good to talk about that also, even though it can be quite saddening to think about.
How about you, LJ? Anything to add to that?
I think Matt put it beautifully and succinctly also. How can you how can you how can you graduate if you can't go to school? Diba? How can you enrich your life if you don't have a degree? And then it's domino effect from there. Diba? How can you graduate school if you're not yet if you're not alive anymore? So those things just stark inequalities just because of thinking very differently from others, which does not affect, by the way, how productive you are, how
Mm.
beneficial you are to a classroom. Diba? It doesn't affect anything. So that's why it's really um, absurd for a lot of advocates like us for sure. Why can't they see it? Diba? Kaya, yun talaga, it's unequal. And from the littlest thing to the from the smallest point to the biggest point, there's inequality, di ba? Sabihin lang na ano sa'yo, ayoko yung pananamit mo to the point na may violence na kasama. You're abused sexually, you're abused also physically. Yung ganun eh, in all aspects there's abuse. So it's really a problem.
Uh-oh. And
That's why it's
I think,
very, very urgent that we help our trans people out.
yeah. And I think when you mentioned domino effect, I thought about the fact even after. So because there's a high chance that these students drop out or they can't, finish their studies because of these policies, you affect their future, their entire future, their capacity to earn a living, um, or to go into sex work. And not that sex work is bad. Definitely, sex work is legitimate work. However, it's not something everyone wants to do. But some people are forced to do it because they have no other choice. They have no other means of making an income. No. And yeah, it's very sad that, it also leads to suicide. It
Mhm.
leads to, the, the end of a life. No. So in your organizations, um, oh, okay. How do you normal handle a discrimination case? Like, what's normally your first step?
For
Like,
well, for Transmasculine Philippines, usually when it comes to the case of being able to use your live name and your preferred uniform, we have a templated letter that we provide to students who request for assistance, which are co-signed by myself and our officers. And we also encourage the students who have supportive parents to have their parent co-sign the letter in order to like file a request to their university. And then we provide step-by-step guidance, like we make sure that we're involved as the student goes through the process of trying to appeal to the school in terms of being able to use their live name or wear their preferred uniform. And in the cases where the students are like far flung, or like the school or university is not budging, we usually start reaching out to other organizations who have similar advocacies and asking them to help us out. So organizations like yours, like Team and Rainbow Rights. We also reach out to organizations like Pantay, which is focused on youth advocacy, and we just try to get as many people as many people as possible involved in the case, because that's also like a helpful tactic when the school feels like there's a lot of external pressure from like a large group of people. Then they're more likely to yield to the request of the student. And we also make sure to provide the student with like peer support, because going through that process of like fighting a discrimination case or trying to appeal for your live name can be very stressful. So we try as much as possible to be there, to be present with the student and make sure that they have someone to talk to while they're going through this matter. And yeah, so that's the first step and pretty much the entire process. And hopefully by the end of it we get to a point where the student is able to succeed, and the university or school agrees to support the student's identity also.
uh, thank you, Matt. LJ, how about Rainbow Rights? Usually, what's your first step at Rainbow Rights?
First step for human rights is to check what legislation we can use so that
Mm-hmm.
our letter is stronger. We have also the templates, but and also we interview usually baka meron pang other things that we can add, what other violations we can add, because The stronger our case is, usually the easier for the school to budge, no, than to give in. And also, I think the only thing I can add with sa ano ni Matt is it's the basically the same, no? We really don't go to to litigation, to the full-blown litigation so far, because sometimes in the few times that we filed it sa fiscal, sa prosecutors, even them don't understand, no? And we're still looking for someone who usually kasi, of course, when you file a case, it's also dependent on your client. And when it comes to the
Mhm.
at the prosecutor's level, pag na-dismiss, and then we get consent from the client to go to an appeal, maybe motion for reconsideration of the DOJ, with the Department of Justice, ayaw na nila. So, yun. So,
Mm.
of course, magkasabay naman din yung route ng alternative dispute resolution. We usually want the school administrator to be in a dialogue with us, and so that we can explain to them that ano, na we don't need to go to the courts, or basically some even non-legal arguments saying na wala naman pong mag-iiba kung yan ang suot niya, kung yan yung gagamitin niyang name, wala namang pagkaiba, wala namang mali-disrupt na anything. So basically convincing them of that. Also, if there's usually an anti-discrimination ordinance in the area, that's applicable to the area, we use it in our letter. Second, we also involve the LGU para lang meron pang stronger push. If they see that we also sent a letter to the mayor, to the author, madalas to the author of the bill, mas malaki yun, nakasulat, sige, nakasulat sa ganyan, if you send it to the legal. And sometimes this ano they help. In the case of Capital State University, um, I think a few months ago, the provincial legal of Capiz, sila yung nakipag-usap dun sa ano. So that's also an avenue that we're exploring. So yun, as much as possible, we get also yun, because sabi ni Matt kanina, we get help from organizations on the ground. And if we can see other champions, we tap them also. And then Rainbow Rights is, kasi meron tayong madaming trainings around the Philippines before. So we also have a database of lawyers that who have been trained by Rainbow Rights dati. So they can take, and they have committed to take on cases. So that's a thing that we also have when they really need a lawyer, and if we are already loaded with cases ourselves. So yeah, that's a few of the initiatives that we do to handle discrimination
Oo.
cases.
Thank you, LJ. Thank you for bringing that up, no? Applying parang every law you can to the specific
Mhm,
case, because I
mhm.
think sometimes the student focuses so much on just the policy. Like
Yeah.
in a recent case I handled, I didn't initially the student never mentioned kasi harassment or discrimination.
Mhm,
So it was not something we realized initially until I kept talking to the student, and it was slowly brought up. And I was like, okay, so I continued to ask him questions now to flesh out all the details of what happened to him at the school. Then I realized, oh my God, so this student, it's not just a uniform policy issue. Um, he was also being harassed, so it was already gender-based harassment. So we also filed a harassment complaint, no? So hopefully with all all of this, the school will take it more seriously, ganon. And I wanted to comment lang on uh the way TMPH does it. So I think tama no, your letter, the template is a request letter sa school. Um we also have a template, but now we don't write it in a way that it sounds like a request. It's more like I'm trans, I have gender dysphoria, so I need you to respect my gender identity. Ganon ganon. And then we just provide a supporting letter citing laws, ganon. So it's not a request anymore because I think it's weird. You have to request for your rights. No naman siguro.
Mhm.
So it's more like informing the school nga, mayroon akong rights.
Mhm.
ganito, ganyan. I'm not sure if that's something you want to do or you want to continue with like the request letter format. Uh,
Yeah, definitely. I think that that's a good stance to take because it shows the university in our school that ayun nga, it's about the students' rights. So that's definitely something that we can and should consider for our template also. So thank you.
and the last question I have for tonight is how can we address transphobia in education? Not necessarily just, us, like um what can other advocates do or what can the country do to address transphobia or what can the government do? Maybe Matt first.
Um, well, for the government, I think the most obvious answer is to pass the Soji bill so that we have any national legislation that protects the rights of the LGBTQIA plus community. And for people who are in the realm of education, regardless of what position you are, if you're a teacher, if you're an admin, if you're a principal, I think that it's at this point it should be required for for educators, for people who in the academic institution, to undergo at the very least basic SOGSC training, because now that we are in the year 2023, people keep saying that there's more and more trans people, there's more and more gay people, but it's not really that there's more of us. It's just that now people have more freedom to realize and self-determine what their gender identity and sexual orientation is. So if, like, as the times change, the educational institutions should change also and keep up with what society is like. And for for students, for allies, I think that just a vocal show of support of your trans peers is always welcome. When you see like a fellow student of yours who is transgender undergoing discrimination at school, like, don't be afraid to call it out, don't be afraid to offer your peer a shoulder of support, just because I feel like at this point, the people who are in the trans community are kind of tired of fighting this fight alone. So we deserve to have external support as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Matt. LJ, how do you think we can address transphobia in education?
Really, I think it's really about mainstreaming and the issue, making it appear in every policy that they have. That's why you also like the passage of the social equality bill. Why? Because not only because it provides punishments or what do you call this, penalties, but also it has a huge educating effect. When it passes, there's a bigger opportunity to mainstream these ideas and the rights of people, persons of diverse soji. So it's really about mainstreaming it and putting all effort in how to make it appear in, I think, in every policy. Actually, in every policy you can put it, even in the curriculums, di ba? We've been having that conversation for the longest time, these examples. So in any activity, even in the flag ceremonies, we can put gender rights there. We can put gender rights in our morning prayers or affirmations of some sort. Yeah, ano talaga, the thing that we need um, in education and maybe in society in general is to really talk about these things, no? To really be exposed to it. And also, just like to also mention, no, because sabi ni Matt kanina about society needing allies. Sometimes even if, minsan nakakalungkot, no, when LGBT people, even coming from the LGBT ranks, they don't understand trans issues. So I hope also, no, as a community, we can do better with that. We listen to advocates, don't listen to anything that we think is right, because basically, di naman nila alam eh, sila ba yung nasa shoes? Did they have the experience of advocacy? So also that, it's the right kind of mainstreaming naman, no? Not just the mainstreaming na pag-uusapan niya lagi pero mali naman. So that's for me that's it. It's how you address transphobia in education. At every opportunity, at every point. Totoo lang, no? Hindi yun nakakapagod. Totoo lang. Kasi even nga yung women's rights, that's how it got, ano eh, how it got mainstream. Di ba? Everywhere, we're looking for women. Asa ng, women-centric provision dito. So that's, for me, that's how you do it. Is to really put representation for persons of diverse origin, more importantly for those who are most vulnerable, trans people are the most vulnerable, I would argue. So they should be there in the ones making policy. They should be the ones who also making sure that uh, some aspect of a policy, some aspect of a program has trans sensitivity to it, so that trans issues, trans rights become mainstream for it.
Oo. And well, both of you mentioned the social equality law, but since wala pa, uh, we also have the Safe Spaces Act, right? And actually, schools are supposed to do things like post information about it, how to
Yes.
report gender-based harassment, what it is, ganon. Except that, uh, from what I've seen, there has been no implementation at the
No
school.
implementation.
So,
Even
di
at the
ba? So,
bars, even at sa bars, public spaces, no implementation. I asked MMDA where are our anti-sexual harassment enforcers. They're still looking for the anti-sexual harassment enforcers. Hanggang ngayon, wala pa rin.
oo. And sa school din, one of the interesting provisions is that they have to have a commission on decorum and investigation, similar to
Yeah,
the
the
sexual
code.
harassment law. Tapos, it has to have equal representation from the LGBT community,
Yeah.
which is really cool. No, pero again, it hasn't been implemented. Walang like in the school where we have a case of harassment, the school yata has no Cody.
Hmm.
And they haven't implemented the Safe Spaces Act at all, no? Parang walang parang information about it, walang Cody, walang uh, like process on how to investigate ganon at the school.
Tapos dapat the
So I think
investigation is also gender sensitive.
oo.
Ganyan. Meron din provision on that. So maganda sana, no? Sayang.
Yeah, sayang siya. So I think maybe we should also write to Ched and remind them
Mhm.
to make sure the
Para the,
schools are
yung
implementing.
sabi nila the CSC already has kasi a policy and state
Oo.
universities that are covered by the CSC. So, yun natin.
Pero sa private school wala. I
For
think.
madalas wala yan.
Oo. So yun, uh, we should definitely utilize also what laws we currently have kasi we have to make do with what we have right now. Oo. And actually, those are all the questions I have. Wala na yung iba. Or okay, maybe final words. Like what message would you like to give out to the audience? Maybe to the students who are having difficulties in schools because of the policies.
Siguro I'll start. Uh, I just like to share also na personally, I actually also was a victim of transphobia coming from my school when I was in school. And just a short anecdote, I because I was studying to be a teacher, so I was taking up secondary education, and during that time, we were tasked to do OJT, which meant that we had to go out and teach, basically.
Mhm.
And when I was doing my OJT, I struggled because my advisor uh, did not agree with my gender expression. She it got to a point where she asked me to meet with her in private, and she basically asked me a lot of like really uncomfortable questions about my gender identity, things like, do your parents know that you look like this? How long have you looked like this? Why do you have to look like that in front of your students? Don't you think the students will be confused? Which is so ironic because my students like had no problem with my gender expression whatsoever. And it made it really difficult for me to be able to complete my OJT. So, that just goes to show that this problem has been existing for a very long time. And it's unfortunate that it still exists today. But at least today, compared to when I was at that age, now have groups and older adults that you can approach for help. There's support now for these cases. There are people who are willing to fight for you, and I hope that more students realize that and remember that they aren't alone in going through their struggle, and that they shouldn't be afraid to fight for the right to an education as well. And don't listen to the people that say that you should just tiisin mo na lang siya, na you should just put up with it until you get out of school, because you deserve to have the ideal education experience. And yeah, there will always be people who will support you on that and will be there for you.
Thank you, Matt. LJ, final words or message.
For me, I will reference this survey from the US. I don't know who did that survey, but I think it's legit naman. So they check whether the young youth, how much of them are gender non-conforming. And I think before, we used to lecture labor rights, that's 7 out of 10. I think now it's higher. It's becoming more and more of a norm to be gender non-conforming. A lot of kids and youth see that it is a way to live life, basically. So we are growing in numbers, which means there's a lot of power in that. So basically, we are at the forefront. I think we're gonna overcome very soon. No, just look at the experiences of people who fought for their rights. So groups of people, maybe African Americans, ano pa, apartheid in South America, women's rights. Eventually, people join you in your fight also, in your fight. So um, there's that. You can look forward to that, but also at the same time, do not be hopeless. There's always hope if you're experiencing discrimination and if you're experiencing abuse. You can contact. There's a lot of efforts now with advocacy groups. Even sometimes we reach government. Also, there are government advocacies. There are very responsive government agencies and also international organizations helping out local organizations to become more responsive to the needs of LGBT kids and LGBT youth, LGBT people in general. So there's that. So hindi sila nag-iisa. Parami ng parami yung mga taong tumutulong at lumalaban for their rights. So if I have one message for them, that's it. That help is gonna come, will overcome eventually. I'm sure of it. Something hopeful naman.
Thank you, LJ. Um, I think what I want students to know is that, you should stand up for yourself. And if you need to, you ask for help. And, well, do something. If you don't do anything, then nothing will happen. But if you do something, then something might happen. I mean, I'm not gonna say that if you fight for your right, um, the end result will always be positive. But if you do nothing, then definitely nothing will happen for you. Uh, so try. Uh, and there are so many people out there who can help. You just need to reach out, uh, and try. No, don't give up. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you, Matt, no, for your insights as a trans advocate of Transmasculine Philippines. Thank you, LJ, for your legal legal insights as a lawyer. No, and hopefully, since this video will be on our Facebook page, then hopefully it will serve as a resource. for students who are facing these issues in the future. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Chase.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Cheese.